My name is Robert, and I am a product designer with a deep passion for healthcare. I love using design to make other people's lives easier, better, and more efficient. I've been interested in healthcare for a while, and this channel is dedicated to a very special passion project of mine called HealthcareOS, where I'm redesigning and rebuilding the electronic medical record. Today's video is picking up sometime last week where I was noodling over the next steps in terms of product and marketing strategy for Alloy.health. It's so nice out here. Look at that, like the sunlight coming through the trees and everything. It's just so nice. Drinking some super coffee this morning. So it's a really nice morning here in Savannah. It's like in the low, I don't even know what it is. It's like in the low 70s right now. This is one of the last days I'm going to be able to do this before it's too hot to sit out here at any time during the day, basically. You know, I realized when I launched the new site that there's actually quite a bit of interest that can generate, both from people, of course, but there's also a lot of vision, I think might be a better term, that it generates for me. Kind of gives me a reinvigorated purpose. It can be really easy to see branding and marketing as this thing that you kind of have to do to make something look good, but the reality is that it is something that unifies you behind a particular goal and mission. And I'm really excited because this new brand and look and feel can kind of go on to a little bit of autopilot now for the next, 6 months, 8 months, until it's time to kind of rethink that a little bit. And now my focus is on product strategy, product design, product research. Again, the whole purpose with this marketing site and everything is to figure out how do I make something? What can I make that people are interested in buying? And what do I need to tell them about? Maybe I build prototypes, maybe I build kind of rough ideas and those are tested and those kind of are validated, but what do I need to build in order to convince somebody that this is the thing to buy, basically, right? And so that's kind of where I'm at. That's kind of what I need to do. And I need to figure out what exactly that product is. So moving forward, so we're in the beginning of May right now, May 12th. So until probably midway through August, it'll be very heavy on product. Most of these updates are going to be product focused, talking about design decisions, talking about research and things like that. I mean, that's most of what goes up here, but these are going to be really heavy on product stuff. The next big product thing to do is patient encounter. I talked about that with my I have these little kind of lists of 3 things I'm focusing on each quarter. And the next big thing is patient encounter. That was what was supposed to be in last quarter, but that's what it's got to be this quarter too. Okay, I can't find the doc, but basically there's 3 things I'm going to work on this quarter. The first one is patient encounter. The second one is design system work. We'll talk about that for sure. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that I'm excited to show you about with design systems. And then the third thing is more research, basically. I've got some interviews lined up. I've got some user testing lined up. I'm hopeful to bring some of those things into these videos because I think they're really valuable and useful, and I think the people who are in them really enjoy it. So I've actually had some requests for that, so be on the lookout for that. The primary thing right now is really on the patient encounter, and that's what I've been focusing on over the last week or two. Really over the last week-ish. It's only been, I think I've only had about a week since I launched, so patient encounter, and there's a lot to think about there. There's a lot to talk about. I'm excited to show you a little bit of that here in a little bit. But patient encounter and design systems work. So I wanted to jump in real quick. We're going to talk about patient encounter in the context of it being a very complex workflow And before I get into that, I want to define complexity for you. And that's where we're going to pick up right here. One of the ever-present problems with an EMR is, as everyone says, an EMR is very complex. But what exactly makes it complex? Like, why is complex exactly the problem? And I want to dive into that a little bit, and I want to dive into it with an example that I think supports this idea fairly well. Complexity is nothing more than having some kind of specialized knowledge with it doesn't necessarily have to be specialized, but usually complexity comes with specialized knowledge. Healthcare being a great example. But it's specialized knowledge, or at least specific knowledge, combined with some kind of unstructured goal. Okay, so let's take a pause for just a second, because I want to talk real quickly about the difference between structured and unstructured goals. What the difference between unstructured and structured goals comes down to is the difference between knowing the tasks that need to be completed by the end user. Let's take a pretty simple example for a structured goal. Let's take like a delivery app, like DoorDash or Uber Eats or a pizza delivery app or something along those lines. Generally speaking, the goal is pretty simple, right? I need to get food. I need to have food delivered to me, and I want it relatively quickly. Those are things that we know to be true. But the problem here, or no, not the problem, but the thing that we have to do in order to fulfill that is we know that there is a certain structure that we need to give a user. For most apps, that's something like browsing restaurants that are available near you based on different criteria. That is browsing menus. You might browse 2 or 3 menus. You might add a couple things to your cart. You might remove things based on price and delivery fee and all that good stuff and time availability. And then at the end of it, you're going to check out and wait for your order, basically. And for the most part, assuming your service is good, this is roughly the extent of the structure that you need. These are the tasks. You can divide those tasks. If you were to put them on a little flowchart or on a little timeline, it would be relatively chronological. First I'm going to browse, then I'm going to add things to my cart, then I'm going to check out, and then I'm going to wait for delivery. To contrast that structured goal, let's take something like medicine, where we have an unstructured goal. And what that means is that while the goal is still pretty knowable, we can understand what a physician is trying to do. We know what their end goal is: take care of patients, get paid, see these patients, prescribe things, do whatever. While those goals are pretty clear, the structure that we need is not quite as clear. And what's more is the structure can change depending on what happens. So, for instance, if a good potential analogy here is, if you're going into the food delivery app to order, let's say, I don't know, pizza, and you went to add pizza to your cart, suddenly you have 6 other options that you weren't able to consider before because you chose pizza. In a similar way, when a physician does something with a patient, suddenly more things become possible. And the mere act of interacting with an EMR for a lot of physicians changes the potential structure and changes the potential tasks and flow they need to use to fulfill the goal they have. This is the crux of the problem. Designing for an unstructured task or an unstructured goal is not quite as simple. Even if we can make it seem rather chronological, the goals, challenges, and problems present in that chronological sequence is still rather, it still changes, it's still in flux, depending on what just was revealed or what is being revealed in that moment. This is really what the difference between structured and unstructured is. It's how set in stone, how chronological and how predictive can those tasks be. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about complexity, and I think we have a pretty good definition of what complexity is and how complexity works. But I want to talk a little bit more specifically about how we design for complexity. What are the things that we need to think about when it comes to designing for these complex, unstructured workflow goal type things, these workflows? So I want to do that with something that I think will be pretty familiar to a lot of you. I want to talk about the patient intake process. And specifically, I want to talk about the process of a nurse or a clinician of some sort doing the intake process. So now I'm actually kind of in the middle of this. So I really want to talk about how I'm approaching solving this problem more than I want to talk about exactly what the problem or exactly what my solution is. And today what I want to do is I want to talk about where the problem is currently and how I'm approaching the problem right now. I want to talk about how to help manage the complexity of a patient intake. The process of a patient intake is actually pretty standard. There's not a lot of variance in this process. Vital signs, social history, medical history, chief complaint, and then some kind of handoff or completion. Now, there can be some extra steps in there depending on the practice type. For the most part, this is what people will expect or will have. There are three main challenges that I think about as it relates to data here. There is the data inputs, the data kind of inheritance, and then the data variance. I know those are rhyming, just stay with me. Now, when it comes to data inputs, this is a pretty set way, we have a pretty set way of handling this. We have inputs, we have labels, and then we can help the user tab between them. Where I do see some room for innovation is how we inherit data from past visits. Or if we have connected devices, we could then inherit the most recent value for that particular data sign. So for instance, if we have, let's say, a height from the last time the patient was in, we can potentially make an assumption that that height maybe hasn't changed too much and only need and basically kind of pre-fill that piece of data so that the user can actually come in and say, okay, hasn't changed. I don't have to do anything because they're the same height they were, and so I'm going to move on. We could do something potentially similar for weight. Potentially, if a user is using a weight tracking program or app that's connected into the EMR, we could go ahead and import that value. Now, there are some potential regulatory kind of issues with that, so I don't know that that's necessarily going to 100% be a great way to handle it, but it could be a way to handle faster input process. The last piece here in terms of the actual data variance is a little bit more challenging. And this is where we get into some of the structured and unstructured conversation. You can see here that I've got a vital sign screen and I've got all of these different types of inputs. Now these inputs can affect further down the road inputs as well. If I put in weight and the weight has gone up a drastic amount, this could impact medications that are being taken and potentially the chief complaint. If the blood pressure is really, really high, this could actually constitute an emergency and may require more immediate attention than what might have previously been expected. Both of these things can impact the complete flow of this process. So there are a couple things that I'm doing to help with this. In this design, you can see I've got a top bar with the steps label, button, and on subsequent screens there are multiple buttons to go back and forth between these steps. And there is the patient's kind of condensed record readily available right in the left-hand side. This is all designed to help a user navigate these different steps, potentially go back and forth between the steps depending on the situation, and also be able to reference past information. Now, in terms of the intake, I'm not sure if that's 100% required, but to me that's a pretty
potentially a good way to handle some of the variance and unexpected kind of unstructured possibilities within the intake process. I'll be doing a much more complete breakdown of what this looks like and how this is coming together in the coming weeks. But I really appreciate you watching. I really appreciate your support. If you like the video, go ahead and like it down below. If you are interested, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. And I also love if you hit the bell icon so you'll never miss an update when these come out. I'm trying to do them roughly once a week, maybe every other week. If you have thoughts about any of this, feel free to leave a comment. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And until then, until I either talk to you in the comments or somewhere else, I will see you in the next video. Thanks so much.